Right now, we're gonna go over an overview of the state of global retail. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Keanan Duffty.
I'm studying the Master of Fashion Design.
Everything is fashion.
I'm just gonna do something that I like.
My dream is to have a brand of
Enjoy.
my own.
I love the school.
My name is Chris, I'm 20 and I'm from Barcelona.
Le stylisme. Je fréquente le cours de stylisme.
Studio Fashion Design.
The meaning of fashion.
I want to be a fashion designer.
Start my own business.
I don't care, go on and tear me apart. I don't care if you do. 'Cause in the sky full of stars, I think I saw you.
And talking about beauty, who else than Mr. Keanan Duffty himself? Please give him a round of applause. Come on, come on. Hey, I love your hair, by the way. It's all yours.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, hey. Lovely to see everyone. I'm not going to talk about beauty. I could talk about hair all day if you want, but no. Today we're gonna have a short. It doesn't look like it's that short though, but we're gonna have a discussion about retail. But first of all, I wanted to start by saying a big thank you to Estefania and the last team. What a gorgeous space we're in. What a wonderful, wonderful space with, you know, a great message running around the walls, all the countries of Latin America on recyclable fabrics. They're going to be repurposed for next year, I believe. So really, you know, an amazing environment to be in. And I also want to say thank you to all of you for showing up and for listening. And I hope I can be entertaining for a little while to all of you. I wanted to give you a little quick intro and tell you, and I promise I won't bore you, but tell you a little bit about this guy. So I'm the dean at Marangoni Miami, which is an amazing school, and we have sort of three really powerful areas of discipline: fashion design, fashion styling, and fashion business. And so, you know, I think it's really important for us to stay on top of things that are happening globally in terms of trends. And one of the areas of interest specifically is retail, because it's changing and evolving very fast and always has done. I'm speaking about that not just as an educator. I've owned a retail store. My wife and I owned a retail store in Soho in New York. As you can tell, I'm based mostly in New York, by the way that I'm all wearing black and you're not wearing black. But the retail environment in the world is a really interesting one. I graduated from Central St. Martin's in London in 1986, a long time ago, do the math. And I was in college with John Galliano. He's a couple of years older than me. And it was a very interesting time in London for retail, and it was where I kind of learned a lot. I worked in a retail store during my college years to sort of pay my way, and there were two really great stores in London to work for. One was Vivienne Westwood's store. Vivienne's really crazy, so I didn't want to work for her. The other was a store called PX, which sold all of the early 80s new romantic clothes. So I was dressing people like Duran Duran, who are still around, and Boy George and all those kinds of people, and models like Yasmin Le Bon, who you guys may not remember, but she is famously married to the singer from Duran Duran, as were all those 80s pop stars. They all had model girlfriends and wives. And so I studied at Central St. Martin's, and then I moved to the US 30 years ago. So I moved to New York at a time when retail was really changing, and when New York as a fashion capital was really changing. And it was kind of an interesting time there too, really fascinating. And after moving to the US, I have to add illegally, I was fortunate to meet a gentleman who's still a very good friend of mine, a gentleman called Eddie Rodriguez, who is from Miami, but had moved to New York and set up a business in New York. And he hired me and got me my working papers. So thank you, Eddie. I still love him to this day. He's a great guy. But that really got me into the US. And then after a couple of years, I decided I wanted to start my own brand. And so I did that in the 90s. And a couple of years after starting, as I said, my wife Nancy Garcia and I, we opened a shop at 50 Spring Street, which is a nice location. I started in January at Marangoni, so this is coming to the end of my first year. And I've been kind of engaged in higher education for about 13 years. And I think it's really important for educators to be practitioners as much as possible, particularly in fashion. You know, if you're a philosopher, you might not be working as a philosopher. If you're an educator, you might just be a philosophical educator. But fashion changes so much. And I wanted to start this discussion about global retail, which I believe is very, very strong. I think the retail environment is really strong. So for all of you business owners, whether you have retail stores, whether you sell wholesale, whether you sell direct to consumer, this is a really great environment to be selling in because there's so much change and there's so much opportunity happening from that change. So I wanted to start by talking about some of, the unexpected factors in play that we've seen over the last 10 years that really impact on retail and have accelerated that change. Things like economic unrest that we've seen from the end of the 2000s, and again, sort of fairly recently through the pandemic, there's been some economic changes, and then a lot of social and global unrest. I was sitting outside and kind of listening to, overhearing someone's conversation, a person who said they came from the Ukraine. And I was in Kyiv in October 2021, and I went to partake in Ukrainian Fashion Week. And it was so amazing, the vibrancy of the retail climate there. I visited a department store called Tsum, which is, we would spell T-S-U-M. And I was amazed to see that as well as all the international brands, Prada, Gucci, and so on, they had a whole floor dedicated to domestic brands. And this is something that I think, certainly in the US, we can learn a lot from to support emerging businesses and to dedicate space to emerging businesses. So, the retail environment's changed a lot, and it was kind of held in place for many years in the United States and in the West, and in Asia too, in Japan, for example, by a department store system, and then by independent boutiques. And that's really changed. It's really, really evolved. But what hasn't changed in terms of the digital revolution that's happening, what hasn't changed is that the consumer still wants to be delighted by a retail experience, whether it's online or digitally. They want to find surprise. They want to find something unexpected. They want to find beautiful products. but they want something memorable and they want something engaging. So there are 3 words to begin with that are really key: memorable, engaging, delights. Whether you're selling online direct to consumer, whether you're selling through a physical retail space, you need to kind of find those areas. So I wanted to take a little trip back in time to 1978. So that's me in the, not with the long hair, they're 2 young ladies. That's me in the red vinyl pants. So I was a 14-year-old punk rocker, and I talked my mum and dad into following me on a journey to London from where I lived, which is about 2.5 hours away from London, and all the way down the end of the King's Road to Vivienne Westwood's shop. And the King's Road in 1978 was the epicenter of punk culture. So you saw multicolored hair, you saw fantastic clothes, you saw all these great things. And the mecca for that was really Vivienne Westwood's shop. And so my mum and dad, lovely people, they said, yes, we'll come with you. So we took the train, we took a bus, we walked. Eventually we came to Vivienne's shop at 11 o'clock in the morning and it was closed. and it said, I went across the street to a cafe and I said, when does the store open? At noon. Okay, I came back at noon. It was still closed. But eventually it opened. And the shop, when my mum and dad saw it, the shop was called Sex, right? You imagine, 14-year-old kid with very conservative mum and dad. They're not that conservative. But my dad said, I'm not bloody going in there. My mum didn't go in either, but she's more open-minded. But when I did step inside, this young lady who you see with the beehive hair and those kind of cat eyes was the iconic, what we would call a shop assistant in the late 70s. Now you would call them sales associate, whatever. Her name's Jordan. And so I walked inside the store, sheepishly, and she was wearing head-to-toe rubber, like a rubber dominatrix outfit, reading the newspaper. And she didn't look up. She completely ignored me. And I thought that was fantastic. I thought that was really great. It was a memorable experience. It was really something that sort of grabbed my attention, that I thought was brilliant. And the walls were all adorned with fantastic clothes, with T-shirts with provocative slogans, bondage gear, 50s rock and roll inspired shoes, and so on and so forth. And Vivienne and her business partner changed the name of that store every 2 years. It was wild. It started in 1970-71. It was called Let It Rock, and they sold kind of 50s rock and roll clothes. Then in 72, 73, it became Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die. They sold biker gear. Then it became Sex, and they sold sort of like, punk and kind of salubrious S&M style clothing. And then ultimately it became Seditionaries, which was at the height of the punk era. And then finally it became World's End, which still exists today. World's End looks like a pirate ship. It's like the set of Pirates of the Caribbean. It's got a tilted wooden floor. It's got 18th century windows and a clock on the exterior that goes backwards. So it's moving backwards really, really fast all the time. And it's such an amazing, it's like stepping into another universe. And what it does is it takes you into the universe of that brand. And I think that's one of the key factors that retail should do. It should take you inside the world of a brand or of a lifestyle. If you have a store, if you sell to a store that sells a multitude of products, but they have a lifestyle expression like streetwear, for example, then the experience of going into that store should take you inside there. And the sales associate should be the kind of guides for that journey. I don't think you can ignore people today the way Jordan did, but nevertheless, that's really what it should do. And changing the name of a store and changing all the merchandise every 2 years is kind of what pop-up stores eventually did. Pop-up stores became that sort of place of kind of constant reinvention. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the first time I saw a pop-up store was 20 years ago in New York. It was a store called, it was a space on Mercer Street in the Soho district of New York. And I saw a sign outside it that said vacant. And I thought, oh, what's that? That's interesting. And I went in, knocked on the window, and it hadn't opened yet. And this little guy came out, and he had a sort of pointy, almost like a hobbit. He looked like a hobbit. He had a pointy hat and a long beard, and really short pants and big shoes. He really did look like a hobbit. And I said to him, what are you doing here? And he said, oh, we have this temporary space that's going to open during New York Fashion Week. And we're going to have brands selling their products. And we're going to have events. And I said, oh, I'm trying to find a space to stage a fashion show on Barbie dolls. And I'm going to put them on a conveyor belt. They're going to go down the conveyor belt and fall off the end into a bucket. Can I use your space? And he said, yeah, sure. So that became one of the events. But what the events did was they drove traffic to the store every single day for something new, fresh, interesting, and delightful. And it was, kind of an amazing moment of epiphany for me, because I thought, oh, this is, I've never seen this before. There had been so-called pop-up stores in Japan that I'd heard about, but nothing really in the United States. So that was really the first time I saw that, and I found it quite fascinating. So I wanted to move on to some global retail experiences I hope you might find enlightening. And there are a couple. There's one in Japan, there's one in New York, and there's one in Shanghai that I'm going to highlight. And the first one is a store that I went to in Japan, and it's called Pool. And you can see the space here. It's built inside a former swimming pool in a kind of senior citizens apartment building, which was disused. So what these architects decided to do was to move in and reimagine the whole space, but they kept all of the integrity of the space. So when you walked into the store, you actually kind of walked down like you're walking into the pool. And they had merchandise displayed on towel racks. They had, storage, industrial storage that had been used in the swimming pool. And they kind of kept the integrity of the space. And it was, relatively temporary space. It didn't last for very long. But what they did, which was really great, is they brought in this gentleman to curate the space. For those of you that may be familiar, this gentleman's called Hiroshi Fujiwara. He's one of the godfathers of streetwear. Here he is holding a shoe and wearing his pool shirt. And so what that did also, it gave integrity to the space. And it helped the consumer to understand that there was validity in it, because this is a very respected designer and streetwear, as I said, godfather. And so that's kind of one example that I think is really interesting. Second, and you may have heard of this, Chanel opened a diner space. They actually repurposed a diner in Williamsburg in Brooklyn and opened it as the Lucky Chance Diner. And it was to promote their new fragrance, which was, if anybody speaks French, I'm going to completely mangle this, but it's called Chance au Fraîche, but Chance, let's say Chance for now. And so Lucky Chance Diner. So they repurposed an actual diner. So again, it's an example of kind of, repurposing an existing space. I thought this was really interesting. Chanel, luxury storied brand, going into a neighborhood that is not traditionally where luxury brands are sold, and actually setting up a space where, they kind of redesigned this whole diner car with, the soft pinks, the soft greens, and neon signage. They had in the back a big space with a oversized bottle of the fragrance. And so that was, the kind of Instagram moment. So this is a kind of a sign of the times that really the idea of pop-up stores is something that's really here to stay. And it's something that, you can all capitalize on in the biggest way. Imagine finding a space that really relates to your brand and doing something within that space, and probably many of you have already. And then the third example that I wanted to give, again, this is more of an industrial space. It's the very snappily titled XC273, not the best name in the world, but this is a space in Shanghai, China, and it's really a department store. It's like 3 floors, a huge void of an entry space with very high ceilings, and then pop-up spaces within it. And again, what the architects did, this was designed by a firm called, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Donshi Design. And so they reimagined what was formerly a towel factory. So this was an industrial space in Shanghai that was reimagined. And again, built around this sort of water space that kind of anchored the atrium. So this is a hybrid almost of permanent and pop-up retail spaces. And then I wanted to move on to this time. I took this picture during the pandemic, obviously. This is how much I love you all. That sign was a green sign. So it wasn't a stop sign, it was a go sign. But I went into Photoshop and made it red so it would relate more to this image. But this was a space, I was walking around Soho during the beginning of the pandemic and everything was boarded up because everything was closed. And then, people started speaking about how traditional retail was dead. And, I really don't agree with that. I think that the sort of symbiotic relationship of online and physical retail is really essential because, first of all, it's still quite difficult to truly communicate a personal and an emotional reaction within the digital space. It's convenience. It means you can retail to anywhere in the world, anywhere in the country, to any consumer at any time, which is wonderful. But it's very hard to create that delightful moment. So I don't believe that physical retail is dead. I think, unfortunately, what has happened is in metropolitan spaces like Miami, like LA, like New York, like Tokyo, and so on and so forth, everything became gentrified and retail escalated so much that it kind of changed the face of retail. But change is always good, really. Frankly, change is always good. Eventually, something really positive comes out of that change. Sometimes it's really difficult. We don't necessarily want to face it, but it's important. Next, I wanted to talk about, these are three factors that I think, and I've mentioned a couple of these words already, that are really key to the retail experience, again, whether it's digital or physical. Building a sense of community. So connecting with your community. You can do that through pop-up stores. You can do it through digital very well. Pop-ups are a great way of collecting data from the consumer. They're also a great way of interacting with the consumer directly. Storytelling, again, you may have brands, you may have retail environments, you may have products, you may be working in the beauty sector, you may be working in the fashion sector or accessories and so on. Telling your story is key, and one of the great opportunities of a physical retail environment is the chance to do that. And I think that's, that's something that shouldn't ever go away. Third, understated cool. I think that Chanel are showing that with their diner. They're doing something in a neighborhood that's not traditionally luxury. And that's a template that a lot of the luxury brands are looking at, doing something outside of their natural space. And then doing something that's sort of, I hate the word cool, but, that has that aspirational factor, but it isn't necessarily about the money. It's an aspiration to have something that makes you part of the first word, which is the community, that sort of secret community. And then fourth, as I'd mentioned, surprise, creating something that a consumer is not expecting. And again, that's a key factor of retail. Like I said at the beginning, I speak from experience of this. Again, over 20 years ago, my wife and I opened this retail store. It was tiny. It was 600 square feet. It's in Soho, but Soho wasn't Soho 20-odd years ago. It was more of a kind of humble space. And we opened it. We thought no one would buy anything from us. And on the first day, of course, people came in and shopped. It was in a weird spot as well because it was actually elevated from the sidewalk. So you had to walk up a few stairs and to get in. The window wasn't at street level. But what I found was when we opened the store, I worked in the store for the first week or so, and people would come in and they'd say, "Oh my God, this space, it's really cool. It's so Japanese." And I was like, "No, it's just cheap rent." But we eventually we had this store for several years. Eventually we closed. But 20-odd years later, people still come to me and say, "Oh, I came in your store. It was really fantastic. It was so Japanese." It was like a really interesting experience, and you were there, and I spoke to you. What it also did for us was it got us our I'd done a lot of side gigs in my time, and one of them was creating a sneaker brand with Reebok, which I did for 3 years. We created like 36 different styles of sneaker, and we would sell the sneakers in this store. And I got a call one day from the person that was actually working in the store, and she said, "Oh, there's this guy here, and he wants to buy like every pair of sneakers that we have." And I was like, "Really?" Put him on the phone. Got on the phone, and he was a Japanese distributor. And so we actually cut a deal. I said, "Why are you buying retail? Why don't you just like become our distributor for Japan?" And he did. So that's the kind of thing that happens through physical retail with an independent store, with a boutique maybe, rather than a department store. But it's an opportunity that you don't necessarily get in other ways. And I think I think it's pretty unique. I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions if we have questions. I kind of wanted to sort of wrap up with that, but I wanted to let you all know I've been very, very honored and very fortunate to be the mentee for 3 of the Pitch to Laughs competitors in the accessories area. And this is something that's really important. Mentoring and helping businesses is really key to my experience and to what I do, because I've kind of learned a lot of how to do things and unfortunately how not to do things over the years. And one of the things that I did want to mention is that at Marangoni, we are launching an executive education program next year. We've actually had a couple of sort of test runs this year with some schools around the world, the Berlin School of Creative Management, for example. So we're going to be launching programs in how to launch a brand in America. We're going to be launching programs in streetwear. We're going to be launching programs in marketing and consumer demographics and customer demographics. I think we're going to have a former FBI guy come in and talk about, lady, I don't know, talk about how to sort of profile your consumer, how to figure out who your consumer actually is. So some of these really fantastic and interesting courses that are running, their short courses, 3 or 4 evenings and maybe a weekend. But yeah, I think we're running out of time. I want to thank you all for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I hope you had some interesting takeaways. And I'm here all week, folks, so come and chat to me.